Welcome back to the Draft Lab. Have you been looking for Money League IDP rankings for best ball or redraft leagues? I'm Joel Worth. This is the IDP tipster, Gary, and we are going over Fantasy Pros IDP rankings, including the suggested scoring set up by their rankers. Today, we are going to talk about the defensive line, and then we're going to go through all three levels of the defense. But let's start off with the scoring so we can all be talking on the same page. I'm going to bring it up right here. All right, so the scoring for individual defensive players, 1.5 points for solo tackles, 0.75 points for assisted tackles, 2 points for TFL, 4 points for a sack, 5 points for an interception, 4 points for a forced fumble, 4 points for a fumble recovery, 6 points for defensive touchdowns, 2 points for safeties, 1.5 points for passes defended. Gary, real quick, is this a pretty standard scoring system that you're used to, or how do you feel about the scoring system?
Well, yeah, this is not nowhere near really what I prefer personally. Actually, as I talk about it here for a second and point out a couple of things, because this isn't widely known when you're looking at Fantasy Pros rankings. This isn't on their rankings page. There's no link to get to it or anything. So the reason that I have access to it is I've had it bookmarked for a long time because I used to actually rank for them for a couple of years. So that was the standard that we were basically asked to go by. But, you know, the first thing that jumps off the page to me is I'm more of a kind of a sack heavy or a balance league kind of guy. I do lean a little bit more towards the defensive lineman getting more in my leagues, or the leagues that I like to play in the most. But it's my opinion. I mean, for the most part, this one here is more of a tackle base because of the sacks only being 4 points. Yeah, I know the tackle loss is pretty decent there, but in an overall aspect, I mean, you need to know this because a lot of people are leaning towards the heavier sacks. A lot of people give 6 points, 5 points or more, or even more for tackles for loss. So, I mean, another thing that stands out about this whole ranking, or I apologize, about the whole setup is the fact that they have 4 points for a lot of their turnover based point or stats. So that's kind of high too. I prefer around the 3 range, you know, and I mean, interceptions at 5 points is really, you know, giving somebody a high five for when they intercepted that ball. So anyhow, there is a big discrepancy here. So when we go through this, we're actually going to kind of cover from both bases on a couple of opinions covering about 12 players or so. And we're going to look at it from the more tackle based kind of look and the sack heavy look and make some comparisons and some subs.
Yeah, I mean, the way I like to look at it is real quick and dirty. I mean, the top tackle guys are going to get in excess of 100 tackles, whereas the top sack guys are only going to get, 20 sacks maybe at the most. I mean, that's the very top tier. So, You just do that multiplication. You're talking 150 points for a linebacker is getting a ton of sack or ton of tackles instead of maybe 80 points for someone who's getting an elite level of sacks. So, just do that kind of quick and dirty math in your head. That kind of breaks down how you can level the scoring system. So,
hey Joel, if I can mention too, I mean, people might be wondering because okay, look, maybe you're not into IDP, but if you're into best ball, you're into redraft, you're into money leagues. If you go to sleeper, at least I do know there are a lot of sleeper fans out there. I've been playing a lot of sleeper leagues with blended IDP best ball in them. Okay. You got money on the line. That's why we're here. That's why we're going over this. I almost slipped my mind to mention that there is a purpose, and as best ball grows, this is going to grow into other formats where hopefully like DraftKings and some others will offer the IDP side of the ball and these kind of leagues. But yeah, sleepers got you covered. So if you're an IDP fan, best ball fan, this is your ticket.
Yeah, waiting for Underdog to release an IDP best ball. That would be a lot of fun, but I'm not sure if we're going to get that, but we'll keep our eye open for it. So
right.
Let's look at their tier 1 Fantasy Pros tier 1 real quick. And it's a very short list. And the names you would expect right at the top. It's TJ Watt, it's Myles Garrett, and it's Max Crosby, all elite players. So let's start with this. Is there any player that you would sub out as a top 3 option using the Fantasy Pro scoring, and who would you drop out of that top 3?
So in that process of looking at the fact that it's a little bit more tackle friendly with the Fantasy Pros, I would probably prefer, well, I know I would, Parsons over having Garrett in there. I love Garrett, and I was a big fan of Garrett last year. I thought that he should be ranked higher last year. Things changed. People stayed healthy, so Watt's back. So, yeah, of course, he's going to slide down the board a little bit here for me. But when it comes to this type of scoring, when you're comparing Parsons, that over the last 3 years of his career, he's had 213 combined tackles, 51 tackles for a loss, 89 QB hits, 40 and a half sacks. He really blew up his rookie year with like 84 total tackles. For the last 2 years since, he's averaged about 65 tackles. All right. So, and what really hurt him in the aspect, especially if you happen to play best ball last year with him, is he slid down a little bit because the ratio in that 65 total tackles that he had last year, that ratio was nearly 50-50. So that ratio the year before leaned a lot heavier into the solos and plus the sacks. So yeah, a little bit. It was even a worse year for him just this past year. I suspect that that's all going to bounce back. All right. Gone is Van Der Esch. Gone is Armstrong. All right. You've got an unproven Sam Williams coming in with a DeMarcus Lawrence that hasn't really been DeMarcus Lawrence for a couple of years and has been kind of buried in a rotation with Armstrong and such while he was there. And then on the other side, you got this new kid that they just got a hold of. What was his Nealon? Is that him? Or am I just thinking of the right?
Marshawn Nealon, yep, from Western Michigan, something like that.
Yeah, second rounder there. So, but I expect to be a rotation here. But when you take Armstrong out of this equation, that's I'm not a huge Armstrong fan, but if you take him out of that rotation of that Dallas team, that makes a huge difference. I mean, you have just nobody proven anything. Not that Armstrong's been an all proven dude, but he's sure got his upside. He's already proved out a little bit last year. So I think that Parsons has got an opportunity this year with Kendricks in the middle. Hey, that dude, he kind of looked like he lost step a couple of years ago. So there's going to be a little bit more opportunities, I believe, for Parsons to not only his tackles back up to that 80 range, but I think that the tackles or the sacks are we've seen his floor. He's got all the upside in the world to add any sacks at any point in time. When you got 89 QB hits and 51 tackles for a loss, and on top of his 40 and a half. So I'm waiting for that to come around, and this could be the year, just for the fact more opportunities, more pass rush. I'm excited to see what Parsons is going to do this year because he didn't quite break out in his third year like everybody thought he might. But this is a different defense, so I'd sub them out in this case in a more tackle friendly type scoring system like Fantasy Pros.
Yeah, we've heard with Mike Zimmer coming in that he's planning to focus on Micah Parsons and feature him heavily. So should be a kind of expect a big year out of him. If there was one player that you wanted to sub out for in a sack heavy setup, who would come out and who would you bring in?
All right. Well, I would also do Danielle Hunter, especially with this move to the Texans. And before I give you the lowdown on Hunter, I mean, just to mention it, Garrett is no lightweight. All right. He just won MVP last year. And, but that can also be kind of a publicity type thing or a fan type based thing. So, but on his performance, he did have one hell of a year. But I mean, he only averages like 43 tackles a season. since he's been in the league. Yeah, and that's, I don't see that growing. If it hasn't grown in how many years have been there? 7 years. If that hasn't really grown, you're not going to probably see that ceiling go up. And that defense around him on the front line, it's arguably to say it's not gotten any better all these years. I mean, it is what it is. He is the defensive line for Cleveland. But so not knocking on him, but with that Parsons, but in this situation with Hunter, let's see, he's had 462 combined tackles in 8 years, 108 tackles for loss, 134 QB hits, 87 and a half sacks. All right. And he's likely coming off his best year ever. What he had, 17 sacks or something, which is actually his career best. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that Harrison Phillips really stood up and playing next to him on the interior defensive line. So Hunter finally got some help. Well, here he is heading into the Texans, has revived Denico Autry's career. He had a career year last year, and then you also have Anderson out there, and they have a couple of worthy, I think Edwards Jr., which is another worthy veteran, and a young guy named Ski or something. I'm sorry, I am really bad at names, but either way, he's walking into a situation where he's been a beast. He's been doing this for years on his own, had some injuries, came back. He's been back with a force for a little bit. He's basically carried that team. So to be put into a situation where he's getting an upgrade across probably three to four positions in that front seven, I love it for Hunter to be able to move up in this tier, especially in his sack department. Is he going to repeat that type of numbers that he had this past year? That's kind of tough. But what I'm saying is he just should probably be above Garrett, because he's also going to be able to get a hold of the tackle. He's proven that.
Yeah, and the one guy that I really like that I think could make a move into this top tier is the guy you just mentioned, is Will Anderson in Houston, who is going to have Danielle Hunter on the opposite side. Anderson had elite draft capital, kind of really proved that he deserved it. Didn't have a great statistical season last year, but like the PFF grades and everything were really strong. Now he's got a full year in DeMeco Ryans' system. DeMeco Ryans is as good a defensive coach as there is. And now he's going to have Danielle Hunter on the other side of him. I think that could be the opportunity for him to kind of really take a step up into that top tier. Like I said, I know he didn't have a great statistical season, but I think we may be on the precipice of him kind of breaking out and becoming that kind of top tier defensive lineman. And he did mention Myles Garrett. If there's one guy that I think might fall out of this top tier, I think it is him. I think the defensive player of the year thing was mostly because he just wrecked that one game against Indianapolis, right? And everybody saw that game. So I think that kind of became a shoe-in. And I think we've seen with these James Schwartz defenses, they're like really good for 1 year, and then people kind of catch up to them. So we'll see what happens in Cleveland. I don't think they're going to be bad by any means, but I do think there could be in for a little bit of regression there. Go ahead.
I was just going to mention Johnny the Greek, our buddy Johnny the Greek. He likes his Anderson sack prop bet for this year. I think it was only like an 8.5 or something. And of course he took the over, and I believe it was a nice plus number bet. Don't quote me. We just did that show 2 weeks ago. I can't remember what I had for dinner just like 2 hours ago. So we'll just leave it at that. But either way, I like Anderson. He's got a huge amount of upside this year.
Yeah, I think he only had 7 sacks last year, but you could definitely see where the growth and development could kind of push that number, especially over just going up a sack on that over under. Like that bet a lot. Before we go on to tier 2, most of you know I am here in beautiful Canton, Ohio, and in less than 3 weeks it's going to be the Fantasy Football Expo put on by our friend Bob Lung. And like you needed another reason to come to Canton to join the Fantasy Football Expo, it's a great time. But you can also come join us on Saturday, August 10th at the Brew Kettle next to the Pro Football Hall of Fame for a drafting extravaganza. And for the first time ever, IDP Plus is hosting an IDP League. Be part of history. You can check out the link below in the show description and get signed up today. I want to say thanks to everyone and our friends at IBT Media. They put on the draft night out, and they do a great job, and looking forward to it this year. So let's move over to Tier 2, and we'll go through the second tier of the Fantasy Pros defensive line rankings. That's Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, Aidan Hutchinson, Danielle Hunter, Josh Hines-Allen, the former Josh Allen, and Will Anderson, a couple of guys that we just mentioned. So let's talk about who we would sub in using Fantasy Pros scoring, and for who. The one guy I'm going to start out with is I'm going to move Brian Burns up from Tier 3 into this Tier 2 in the second tier. And I'm going to take out Josh Hines-Allen. He had 19 sacks last year, career high, and more than he had, I think, in his career combined prior to last season. So a little bit of an anomaly there. Not sure that that's repeatable. We'll see what happens with Trayvon Walker if he can ever get things going. But I really like Brian Burns this year, going from Carolina to the Giants. He'll be playing opposite Kayvon Thibodeaux. He'll have Dexter Lawrence in the middle. I think that's a Giants team that's on the rise. I don't think they're going to be the doormat that everyone thinks they are. And Burns is going to be part of the reason that I think they're going to be a better team than people expect. They could have a really good defensive line, which I think is going to kind of paper over some of their other deficiencies defensively. They got some good linebackers with Micah McFadden and guys like that. Secondary is a little weak, but man, I think that defensive line could really put some pressure on the quarterback. And I think Brian Burns is going to be kind of leading that charge.
Yeah, I loved it too. And well, basically between him and your next guy, I didn't see any other more obvious ones. So just go on and roll with Sweat.
Okay. Yeah, and in sack heavy scoring, the other guy I really like is Montez Sweat. We saw what happened last year when he went from Washington to the Bears. His sack totals just kind of took off. He was the focal point of that defense with Matt Eberflus. Really thought they might go out and get kind of a bookend for him in the draft, but they took Rome Odunze instead. Can't complain about that pick. Obviously, Odunze is super talented, but Sweat's going to be the only guy in town. So I think he will still have some elite sack numbers like he had last year. I'm going to take out Aidan Hutchinson. Don't get me wrong, Hutchinson's a great player, just has never really put up like extreme statistical numbers, like real high, the IDP numbers that'll kind of fantasy numbers that'll get you into that second or top tier. So he's the guy and they brought in some competition as well. They brought in DJ Reader from Cincinnati to kind of eat up some snaps in the middle. So I think it's going to be a more balanced defense in Detroit. They've got a better secondary this year. So I don't think Hutchinson's going to be real good real life player, but not necessarily a great statistical player. All right. So let's move on to Tier 3. And that's going to be the aforementioned Montez Sweat, the aforementioned Brian Burns, Trey Hendrickson from Cincinnati, DeForest Buckner from the Colts, Alex Highsmith in Pittsburgh, Harold Landry in Tennessee, and Jonathan Greenard, who's now in Minnesota, coming over from Houston. So let's talk this third tier, Gary. What player would you sub into this tier from outside the tier using Fantasy Plus scoring, and Fantasy Pro scoring, and who would you take out?
All right. In this first case, I would just take out Alex Highsmith for Alex Greenard, Carl Granderson, guy I'm actually a fan of, so that's why I'm laughing at myself. But anyways, when it comes to Highsmith, man, I'd like to just really point out something that's pretty obvious. 3 years ago, he had 6 sacks. Yeah, that was with Watt healthy 2 years ago. He had like 14 sacks. Watt wasn't healthy, only played 10 games, only had 5.5 sacks. Watt comes back last year. Highsmith, he's right back down to seven sacks. All right. That also worked in the tackle department. His tackles dropped. He's not a upper tier option as long as Watt is healthy. So assuming that Watt is, I'm replacing him with Granderson, who, as a 5-year journeyman, undrafted by the Saints, has been learning from Cameron Jordan for a long time. And he just got paid right before the season started last year, after only just having a kind of a small profile breakout in 2022. All right. And they went in and paid him. He came in this past year. I think he ended up with like 7. What was it? Let's see. I don't want to misquote that. Let's see. He went from 53 combined tackles in 2022 with 5.5 sacks in 16 games and 4 starts, to playing 17 games, started all of them, and had 80 tackles with 8.5 sacks. All right. So I really love that this is a guy that's 80 some tackles, going from 53. That's already exceptional, playing as an outside linebacker or defensive end. He's already that, and he's already increased his sacks with that. Maybe not at the rate he did his tackles, but in a tackle-based scoring league, looking at Highsmith and him being so dependent on tackle and sack production based off of if Watt's healthy or not. Give me Carl Granderson. The guy's got paid, and he's their number 1 defensive end right now. I don't care if they got Chase Young. I think he was brought in a lot more. You just kind of look at the paperwork, look where the money fell with Chase Young in the contract. He's just going to be backing up Jordan Cameron more than anything to help him out, give some relief to Carl Granderson. I don't see any upside or downside to Carl Granderson at all.
Yeah, I love that. And a perfect example of how you need to check the scoring and understand how it works, because Granderson is much more valuable in a tackle heavy format. So speaking of the scoring format, in a sack heavy scoring format, who would you move up into this tier and who would you move out?
Let's see if I'm looking at it correctly. Yeah, I think I talked a little bit about Jonathan Greenard, and I mean, the guy's done it for 1 year basically in his career. He did have a good 2022. He caught everybody's attention. In his total career, he's had 30 tackles for loss, 38 QB hits, 22 sacks. Well, actually, that's the last 3 years. He's averaged 33.5 tackles a year in that time span. It was really his blow up last year that I think has got him up this ladder, being on, he was with Houston last year, right?
Yep.
Texans, right?
Yep.
I couldn't spit it out. I wanted to say Titans, but anyways, he was being with the Houston, which I just talked about Hunter going there and how great of a job it is. That helped Greenard. Now he's going up to Minnesota and he's taking over for Hunter, right? In a situation where Hunter had no help, Greenard ain't got any help. Greenard is not at the elite level that Hunter's been in his whole entire career. And Greenard has only proved it this 1 year. So I definitely would slide him down. I think he owes me another prove it year. And I'm going to replace him with Kyle Mack. Just for the fact, I think that people are really overlooking the bounce back that Kyle Mack had last year with the Chargers. I mean, you got to give this guy kudos. He just killed it. There's no reason to really recite his 10 years worth of numbers here, but last year he had his best year. He had 17 sacks and had 74 tackles to add to that, which was actually like what he averaged the first 4 or 5 years of his time in the league. So it's kind of like he's came full circle. in this situation with Greenard, I got so much doubt. Mack may not even come close to, getting 17 sacks, but I think that he could at least get that dozen where I kind of doubt if Greenard's going to get them or not, So give me Mack over Greenard in this tier.
Yeah, and Mack in a best ball format is awesome. He had a couple of just massive games last year. So, if you've got him kind of lined up to be in your lineup, he's a really, really good player. The one guy I want to talk about is a rookie, and that's Latu, who went to the Colts. I know it's dangerous to give up just recklessly throw out these kind of Hall of Fame comparisons, but I look at the guy and I see Jason Taylor. I just can't help it. I think he's the most pro-ready kind of edge rusher, sack artist in the draft. I think he's going to step right in and be the starter in Indy. He's got some really good talented players on the defensive line with Kwitty Paye and DeForest Buckner. Buckner's the guy I think he might kind of replace if he had to replace somebody in this tier, just because, again, like Hutchinson, like we talked about before, really solid, very good player, but not a great statistical player, kind of playing in the middle of the line there in Indy. And I think the Latu is just going to come in. I think he's going to be a force from day one.
Oh yeah, I believe it. There's a lot of people that like him. I do too. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pivot off that here in a little bit. So,
okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about the sleepers, the players who weren't listed in the top 3 tiers. So let's start out, Gary. What defensive lineman are you targeting that's not in the top 3 tiers if it was regular Fantasy Pros scoring?
Well, Kayvon Thibodeaux is sitting here, and he's probably kind of a popular name running around right now, anyhow. But I'm going to ahead and bring it up considering where he's at in these rankings. So I think that after having a better second season, the improvement of Burns being around, he's averaged 49.5 tackles since he's been in. I think that he's got a lot of room to improve. Probably come on the tackle base side of things. It's going to be hard to come off of more than 11.5 sacks. I'm going to set that as his ceiling again this year. That I really do think that where he's going to pick up is in the tackle department. I think is playing the outside linebacker, having another option across from with Burns. You got Dexter Lawrence that's been in the middle anchoring that for a while. I believe they got like a second, maybe third-year kid defensive tackle, 3rd or 4th rounder that's actually coming up to be a solid piece on the inside. This Giants, as everybody's talking about, this Giants defense is arguably as good as their offense if you're looking at it, in my opinion, in grades. I love the defense. I might be a little bit partial to that, but I like Kayvon Thibodeaux. I think he's got a lot of tier 2, at least in this tier 2. Now you got to look again where Fantasy Pros' tiers are. You're talking top 12. I think he can reach up in there to where he's definitely going to be in the top tier 3, possibly in the lower tier 2 range. I think he can hit home. That's a flyer. You're talking ADPs in your drafts, and remember, these are deeper people. These are these ones that you're going to add towards the end of your roster, if you're even needing to go this deep.
Yeah, and the guy I want to talk about is just one of my favorite players, and that's Christian Wilkins, who formerly of the Dolphins went to the Raiders. I think that Raiders defense is going to be elite. They're just not going to be good. I think they're going to be elite. He's going to be playing with Max Crosby. We'll see what happens with Tyree Wilson. Now that Chandler Jones is gone, Wilson's going to get a chance. He's finally healthy this year, we hope. So I think that could be a pretty fierce defensive line. And Wilkins, I think, kind of playing in the middle of that line, has some real tackle upside. I just think that's going to be a really good team. He's such a good player. Has kind of flown under the radar a little bit, maybe in the popular mind, but you can see how much money the Raiders gave him. They definitely they know the talent. So I think he's going to be a guy that could really kind of step up and move himself, maybe from tier 3, maybe up into tier 2.
Yeah, I love Wilkins. I actually have a sack prop bet out on him. I think they only have him at like what was it, 4 and 7 or 4 3/4 of a sack. He just had 9 sacks last year. Now that was the most he's ever had in his career. But people have to reflect back. I think it was 2022 or 2021. This dude, as a defensive tackle, broke 100 tackles. Okay,
Yep.
that's a beast. All right, so he hadn't been known as a big sack guy prior to that, but yeah, I think this is being put in there next to Max Crosby, another super elite top 3 dude that we done seen in tier 1 here. You put those two next to each other. I mean, I think it's almost criminal that Wilkins is not at least up in the teens.
Yeah,
I love him.
Huge fan. All right, Gary. If we're talking sack heavy, who's your sleeper that you want to move up into one of the top 3 tiers that's not in there now?
All right. Well, we talked a little bit of, well, I'm not going to pronounce his name right. Latu. Is it right?
Latu. Yep.
Latu. Talking about Latu. Hey, I know Kwitty Paye has been there for about 3 years now, or 4 years, heading on there. He's had some injuries in his career. He's been nicked up. He got his first real full healthy year in last year. He's never really he's been he's a first rounder. He's never really lived up to that super billing that everybody was hoping for. I think that there's still another step here for Kwitty Paye, and it's really based off the idea that that line is even better than what it was last year. All right. And they lost Stewart for what, like 6 games last year for doing PEDs or whatever. And had some backups come in here with Buckner. You got Samson. I'll call him Samson E on the opposite side that started from
Ebukan.
Yeah, and then you add in your buddy Latu, right?
Yep.
So right, it's tough, man. It's tough being me. But you add all these guys in together. I still see growth for Kwitty Paye. He's got a full season underneath his belt to where he stayed healthy, and I think that he can get into the double digits and maybe reach the bottom of that tier 3 area in the overall aspect. He's got to stay healthy. Again, he's a little bit deeper. He should not be this deep if we was going by his rookie eye. But we're not. We're 3 years later, so we're kind of just falling back on those results. So, but I like him a lot this year too. I think he can take it another little step.
Yeah, and I think one thing people don't remember is he kind of immigrated when he was young, so he was kind of late to football before he went to Michigan. So I think there's kind of some development there too as well.
Yeah, which he was right down there, Latu and Paye, man, they're clear down here 46, 48. So
yeah,
I mean, you got him down here by Van Ginkel that was just injured like towards the end of the season for Miami. So yeah, there's a little bit of value there, especially in some deeper best ball formats.
Yeah, I think that could be a pretty fierce edge rusher duo for the Colts. The guy I want to talk about, I can't not talk about my Packers. This is a really deep sleeper, but I think one that could really kind of thrive in the new defense that Jeff Hafley is going to put in there, and that's Devonte Wyatt, the former first-round pick out of Georgia. They're going to be switching to a 4-3, and all we've heard from Hafley all offseason is, we want these guys, the interior guys, to be able to penetrate and cause disruption, get to the quarterback, get to the running back in the backfield. Wyatt can do that, right? He had a 80.4 PFF pass rush grade. Like he's not good against the run. Like I'm not gonna sit here and tell you he's a well-rounded player, but he can get after the quarterback. I think this scheme change, this coordinator change, is perfectly aligned with what he can really do well and what they're going to ask of him. So I think this is a guy that kind of has a chance to put up maybe a double-digit sack season just kind of out of nowhere.
Nice. Actually, I've used him in some really deeper leagues over the last few years. I'm talking, you're starting like 5 or 6 defensive linemen in some of these, so bye weeks and everything. Pretty deep, man. I like that kid. Hey, I'm impressed. You see what I had to do as you was talking? I had to actually like search for this to find him
It's
in
deep.
the rankings. He's
It's
way down
absolutely
there.
deep. Yep.
Yeah, it's no deeper than that, folks. Joel nailed it.
Yeah, but if it's someone like if you're in a very, very deep league and like an all IDP league or something like that, where you really need to go deep, I think that's a guy, like I said, that can just put up a double-digit sack season out of nowhere. He's flashed, right? He's put up some flashes.
I've had him in a lineup or two here.
Yeah, the consistency hasn't been there, but he's gonna be playing next to Kenny Clark, and I think that this, like I said, the scheme is just perfect for what he can do, and they're gonna kind of utilize him much better than the former coordinator did. So looking forward to that. I think this is going to be a much better defense too.
Yep. Good stuff.
All right. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you've learned something about the defensive line. Next week, we're going to talk about the linebackers. So Gary, we'll talk to you then.
Yeah, it'll either be me or Axton, man. We're going to tag team on this one. We're going to get like 2 or 3 of these in a row, right? Rock and roll on the sleeper IDP.
Next week. And then the defensive backs. Yep.
Those money leagues, man. Be ahead of the curve.
All right, everybody. Until then, thanks for checking in, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.